Three bank robbers disappeared from the forbidding rock in San Francisco Bay. It appears to be the first successful escape in the history of the maximum security prison.
In December 1961, four inmates who knew each other from previous incarcerations were assigned into neighboring cells in Alcatraz. They were Frank Morris, Alan West, John Anglin, and his brother, Clarence Anglin. The inmates began formulating an escape plan under the leadership of Morris. Over the subsequent 6 months, they widened the ventilation channels underneath their sink using discarded saw blades found on the prison grounds, metal spoons from the mess hall, and an electric drill improvised from the motor of a vacuum cleaner. The men concealed their work with painted cardboards modeled as grills, and the noise with Morris's accordion on top of the ambient noise of music hour. Once the holes were wide enough to pass through, the men accessed the unguarded utility corridor directly behind their cells and climbed to the vacant top level of the cell block, where they set up a secret workshop. Here, using stolen and donated materials, they made life preservers, a 6x14-foot rubber raft from 55 stolen raincoats, paddles from scrap wooden screws. And while all of this was going on, one of them was to be on the lookout for guards via a handmade periscope. Finally, they climbed the ventilation shaft to the roof and removed the rivets holding a large fan in place. Once on the roof, they studied the guards' paths as well as the searchlight's path in order to shape their route out of the island. Interestingly, their life preservers were based on a design one of them found in a Popular Mechanics article. The raft's design was based upon a utility boat one found in a Sports Illustrated article, and the raft's seams were carefully stitched by hand and sealed with heat from nearby steam pipes, following a tutorial from another Popular Mechanics article. The men concealed their absence while working outside their cells by sculpting dummy heads from a homemade papier-mâché-like mixture with paint coming from the maintenance shops and hair from the barbershop floor. With towels and clothing piled under the blankets and the dummy heads positioned on the pillows, they appeared to be sleeping. On the night of June 11, 1962, with all preparations in place, the men initiated their plan. Unfortunately for West, he discovered that the cement he had used to reinforce crumbling concrete around his vent had hardened, narrowing the opening and fixing the grill in place. By the time he managed to remove the grill and re-widen the hole, the others had left without him. He returned to his cell and went to sleep. From the service corridor, Morris and the Anglins climbed the ventilation shaft to the roof. Carrying their gear with them, they descended 50 feet to the ground by sliding down a kitchen vent pipe. They then climbed two 12-foot barbed wire perimeter fences. Now, at the northeast shoreline near the power plant, a blind spot in the prison's network of searchlights and gun towers, they inflated their raft with a concertina stolen from another inmate and modified to serve as a bellows. At some time after 10 p.m., investigators estimated they boarded the raft and departed towards their objective, Angel Island, 2 miles to the north. Frank Lee Morris, the mind behind the escape, was born in Washington, D.C. Morris was abandoned by his parents during his childhood and orphaned at age 11. He was convicted of his first crime at age 13, the first of many. Morris ranked in the top 2% of the general population as measured by IQ testing. While serving 10 years for a bank robbery, he successfully escaped from the Louisiana State Penitentiary, only to be recaptured a year later while committing a burglary. He was then sent to Alcatraz, where he now had 14 years to serve. Here's his extensive criminal resume. The Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, were born into a family of 13 children on a farm in Donaldsville, Georgia. John and Clarence were apparently inseparable as youngsters. They were also skilled swimmers and amazed their siblings by swimming in the frigid waters of Lake Michigan as ice still floated on its surface. As for their legal troubles, Clarence broke the ice first when he was caught breaking into a gas station at 14 years old. Soon, the brothers began robbing banks and other establishments as a team. They claimed that they used a weapon only once, a toy gun. In 1958, John, Clarence, and their older brother, Alfred Anglin, robbed the Columbia Savings Bank building in Columbia, Alabama. All received 35-year sentences. And after repeated attempts to escape, John and Clarence were transferred to Alcatraz. Here's their criminal resume, which compiles crimes that they committed together. The escape was not discovered until the morning of June 12 due to the successful dummy head ruse. Subsequently, over the next 30 days, multiple military and law enforcement agencies conducted an extensive air, sea, and land search. Here's what they found. A paddle floating about 200 yards off the southern shore of Angel Island. A wallet wrapped in plastic complete with names, addresses, and photos of the Anglin's friends and relatives around the same area. Shreds of raincoat material believed to be remnants of the raft were found on a beach not far from the Golden Gate Bridge. And at last, a prison boat picked up a deflated life jacket made from the same material 50 yards off the Alcatraz island. According to the final FBI report, no other physical evidence was found. FBI agents estimated early that the men had drowned. They cited the fact that the individual's personal effects were the only belongings they had, and the men would have likely drowned before leaving them behind. However, no human remains were found at the time. An even-weighted body will normally float up to the surface after 3 or 4 days. When the water is cold, bodies decompose slower and can float up to 2 weeks. In the bay, it is estimated that 2 out of 3 corpses are found. One could make a firm assumption that not an inch of the bay went unexamined for the FBI's 30-day search following the escape. On July 17, a month after the escape, a Norwegian ship spotted a body floating in the ocean 17 miles from the Golden Gate Bridge. The ship did not retrieve the body and did not report the sighting until October. The coroner doubted that it could have been one of the escapees, emphasizing the improbability that a body would still be floating on the surface of the ocean after more than a month. Instead, he proposed that the corpse may have been that of Cecile Philip Herman, a 34-year-old unemployed baker who had jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge 5 days earlier. FBI investigators announced their official position that, while it was theoretically possible for the men to have reached Angel Island, the odds of their having survived the turbulent currents and frigid waters of the bay were negligible. Presuming they did survive their escape, West said they had planned to steal clothes and a car upon reaching land, but no such thefts were reported in the area, according to the FBI. On December 16, 1962, 6 months after the escape, while working on culinary duty in the storage room below the kitchen, Alcatraz inmate John Paul Scott and Darrell Lee Parker bent the bars of a window, climbed down a rope, and made it to the water. They then attempted to float up to the San Francisco shore, a distance of 1.4 miles. For that purpose, they made water wings from stolen rubber gloves which blew up. Parker had to give up after a short time because he had broken his ankle during the escape. He was recaptured on the rock formation Little Alcatraz, which lies 100 yards from the Alcatraz island. On the other hand, Scott successfully swam a distance of 3.1 miles from Alcatraz to Fort Point, at the southern end of the Golden Gate Bridge. There, he was found by teenagers while suffering from hypothermia. After recovering in the Letterman Army Hospital, he was immediately returned to Alcatraz. Scott's the only documented case of an Alcatraz inmate reaching the shore by swimming. Today, a multitude of athletes swim the same Alcatraz to Fort Point route as a part of 2 annual triathlon events. In January 1965, the FBI investigated a rumor that Clarence Anglin was living in Brazil. Agents were dispatched to Brazil and South America at large, but found no direct evidence that he was there. Brazil was known as a safe haven for American criminals as the country was yet to have an extradition treaty with the US. In 1967, a male called the FBI claiming to have been Morris's classmates and to have known him for 30 years. He said he had bumped into him in Maryland and described him as having a small beard and a mustache, but the man refused to give further details. Federal officials say that in the late 60s to the early 70s, there were 6 or 7 sightings reported of the Englund brothers, all in North Florida or Georgia, which is interesting as the case was covered everywhere in the US. Regardless, on December 31, 1979, the FBI closed its file after a 17-year investigation. Their official finding was that the prisoners most likely drowned in the cold waters of the bay while attempting to reach Angel Island. They cited the remnants found of the raft as well as the personal effects of the men as evidence that the raft broke up and sank at some point. The 3 convicts would have then succumbed from hypothermia, and their bodies would have been swept out to sea by the rapid currents of the San Francisco Bay. In 1989, a woman who identified herself as Kathy called the Unsolved Mysteries tip line to report that a photo of Clarence Englund matched the description of a man who lived on a farm near Marianna, Florida. When the FBI was dispatched around the area, another woman recognized the photo of Clarence Englund and said he lived near Marianna. In spite of that, none of the men were found there. For the subsequent 20 years, the case barely had any development, but in the early 2010s, it took a drastic turn. In 2011, a documentary on the National Geographic's channel uncovered the case's files with U.S. Marshal Michael Dyke. They would find a teletype saying that, in contrast to the official FBI report, a raft was discovered on Angel Island the day after the escape, and footprints were found leading away from the raft. Furthermore, a 1955 blue Chevy was reported stolen in Marin County the same day, a claim corroborated by stories in the Humboldt Times and the San Francisco Examiner. The following day, a motorist in Stockton, California, 80 miles east of San Francisco, reported to the California Highway Patrol that he had been forced off the road by 3 men in a blue Chevy. The same year, 2011, an 89-year-old man named Bud Morris, who claimed he was cousin of Frank Morris, said that on 8 or 9 occasions prior to the escape, he delivered envelopes of money to the Alcatraz guards, presumably as bribes. He further claims to have met his cousin face-to-face in a San Diego park shortly after the escape. His daughter, Sarah, who was 8 or 9 years old at the time, said she was present at the meeting with Dad's friend, Frank. In 2015, the Englund family decided to cooperate with the U.S. Marshals. This would become the most important moment in the search for the convicts as the Englunds showed a photo of the brothers where they seemed to be distinctly older. The photo was allegedly taken in 1975 in Brazil and given to them in 1992 by a family friend. Forensic experts confirmed that the photo was taken in 1975 and asserted that the 2 men were more than likely the Englunds. The family friend who gave the photo was someone named Fred Brizzi. By looking at old newspapers, we can see that Brizzi was one of 7 men involved on a drug smuggling operations where a plane from South America dropped 600 pounds of marijuana at a ranch in Tarpon Springs, Florida. Hence why he, a drug smuggler, could have met the brothers in Brazil. He claimed to have bumped into them in a bar and then joined them in their farm where he took the photo. Former U.S. Marshal Art Roderick admitted, "It is very interesting because in the early 90s, I took a phone call from a male who said to have seen the brothers in Brazil, in a farm. At that point in time, it really wasn't actionable enough, but that phone call always stuck in my head for years." Fast forward to January 2020, 5 years following the photo's discovery. Artificial intelligence specialist IdenTV concluded that the men in the photo were John and Clarence Englund. Statistically, by their deep facial recognition software, both faces would rank in the top 1% of probability as a match. In other words, if you were to feed 10,000 random pictures displaying 2 men to their algorithm and one in the pal was the Fred Brizzi photo, the Fred Brizzi photo would rank first as a match to the Englund brothers. Getting back to the meeting where the Englund family showed the photo, they admitted that they used to receive Christmas cards from the brothers every year, and that the tradition continued for 3 more years following their escape. Among the 3 letters after the escape, only one was recovered, a simple "To Mother from John, Merry Christmas." The writing matches perfectly, and the letters received while Clarence and John were in prison always displayed the prison's number in contrast to their most recent. The only problem is the absence of a stamp to prove when the cards have been sent. After this meeting, the family would meet Michael Dyke and show him cassette recordings dating from their greeting with Fred Brizzi in 1992. The whole situation of it is nobody positively knows they're alive really but me. When I sat and talked with them, I asked them, I said, "How'd you boys make it across there?" Neither one of them said anything, and I said, "I know how you did it, I remember. Well, down there at the mouth of Alafia, we'd go down there and take a rope and tie it around of a rudder post, and we'd wait for a boat to pull on out, and we hold on to this rope and body surf. You're the first one that's ever thought of it," he said. "That's the way we came across." As you heard, Brizzi's recordings present an alternative escape theory. Rather than using the raft to cross the bay, they paddled around the island to the boat dock to escape the guards. There, they attached their raft to the rudder of a prison ferry that departed the island shortly after midnight, which is also coherent with the boat's schedule. Coincidentally, an electrical cord was reported missing from the dock on the night of the escape. From there, they were towed by a prison ferry till they reached the middle of the bay, where a waiting boat towed the escapees to the mainland. Remarkably, there's an eyewitness to this theory. Robert Checky was an off-duty San Francisco policeman sitting in his car just before midnight at San Francisco Yacht Club that evening. He was gazing out the bay when he noticed what he calls a pristine white boat. Checky says he immediately felt like something was wrong because the boat had no lights on and he could not hear any noise coming from it. After watching the boat intensely for several minutes, Checky said a light went on. Somebody on the boat was shining a spotlight or a flashlight into the dark waters of the bay. It just didn't look right. I said, "This is really unusual." It started moving and starboard lights came on. I couldn't tell whether it went north or south. It just disappeared into the dark. The next day, when Checky found out there had been an escape from Alcatraz, he filed a report about what he had seen. The FBI questioned Checky for days and days, and sometimes the interrogations got somewhat nasty. Checky recalls one FBI agent said to him, like, "Hey, let's make this go away, let's bury it." Following these sudden discoveries, Art Roderick said that if the Robert Checky and Fred Brizzi version is true, Fred Brizzi was probably the one towing them out from the middle of the bay, which would explain his impressive 20-year silence since taking the photograph or 30-year silence since the escape itself. In the end, we're all left perplexed. All of the escapees were hardcore career criminals, yet were never caught doing anything after the escape. How could they have turned their lives around? Frank Morris, beyond his brilliance, was making every wrong choice one could make. The Englund brothers were 2 rednecks, backward boys from Florida. Perhaps they never left crime. Perhaps they were employed in Fred Brizzi's extensive drug trafficking ring, which would explain owning a farm in Brazil. If they are alive, which is still a possibility, they probably won't come forward as they still owe time to the government. In any case, the mystery surrounding the Alcatraz escape will carry on.